Alright, so I have a bunch of these small parts organizer bin thingies, and right now they're just stacked on this shelf, which is fine. It's where I keep like all the nuts and bolts and washers and other random things like that. But it seems like every time I want to get to a part, it's never in the top one. It's always in one of the other three, so I gotta pull all of them out, unstack them, and today I just wanted to make something that I could store all of these in still and just pull out one at a time, get the part I need, and then put it back. So, if I come over to my miter saw, I have all this space above it that is really unused. So my thought is that I could build some cubbies that would not only store the small parts containers, but it would also act as kind of like a second dust hood for the miter saw. So any dust that isn't contained by that smaller dust hood would kind of be deflected back down, and maybe later I could add some sides to it. So let's go ahead and do that. So right now I'm ripping all the pieces to width, which is approximately 12 inches. For the vertical pieces I'll be using 3/4 inch plywood, and for all the horizontal pieces I'll be using 1/2 inch plywood. And once I had all the pieces ripped to width, I could start cutting everything to length. I started by cutting these with a miter saw, but eventually switched to the table saw with a table saw sled. It seemed a little bit easier to control the large pieces on the sled. Alright, so I've got all the horizontal pieces cut out there, as well as all the vertical pieces cut out here. Next thing I gotta do is I gotta cut dados into all the vertical pieces to accept the horizontal pieces. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll be cutting 1/4 inch dados, hence why I use 3/4 inch plywood for all the vertical pieces. Now I don't have a dado stack for my table saw, so this step took a little bit of patience and some careful measurements, but in the end, I think it came out pretty nice. The key to this step is to move the table saw fence as few times as possible. Also, test the blade depth on a scrap piece before making the first cut. And I didn't cut out all the waste material with the table saw sled because I wanted to bust out the chisels, but you could easily cut out the entire width of the dado with the table saw. Now the two center vertical pieces are shorter than the two outer vertical pieces, but I left them all the same length. That way I could reference the fence on the table saw for all the dado cuts. Alright, so I could cut off this dimension on these two center vertical pieces, but now I can't really use the fence to reference cutting off this chunk. So instead what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna line up this side right about there, make sure everything kind of lines up, and then I can make a mark where that edge needs to be cut off. And that way I'm not really relying on dimensions and how close I am. I'm actually like making a relative mark right there. So now I can bring my fence over till the saw blade is right there and chop that off on both the verticals on the other side. And with all the pieces cut to width and length, I attempted to do a dry fit test. Keyword, attempted. An extra set of hands would have been ideal for this step. But eventually I gave up on the dry fit test and just went for it all. And during all the assembly, all I used was glue and some brad nails to join everything together. I decided to assemble both ends of the cabinet separately and then join these two assemblies together with the center horizontals. Alright, so I've got all the middle shelves in. That proved to be a little bit challenging just by myself, but we got it done. Next thing, so I just have this set in place, but I'll put the top and the bottom on, and we're getting pretty close to being done then. And right here was going to wrap up the project, but I thought it was looking a little bit dull. So I found some leftover walnut, cut it into strips, and used it as edge banding on the plywood. And again, I just used glue and pin nails to attach the walnut to the plywood. And finally, I could sand everything down and get it ready for finish. And for the finish, I used wipe on poly, but I only applied it to the walnut edging. I thought it might look cool in contrast to the unfinished plywood, and to be honest, I only had a small amount of the wipe on poly left. Lastly, I needed a way to hang this cabinet on the wall, and since I've never used a French cleat before, I figured this would be a perfect opportunity. If you don't know what a French cleat is, basically it's a long strip of wood ripped down the middle at a 45-degree angle. Then one half is attached to the cabinet, and the other mating half is attached to the wall. Alright everybody, so that's going to be a wrap on this project. A couple quick things. I'm really enjoying the contrast between the walnut and the plywood, and the fact that I finished the walnut and I left the plywood unfinished. I think it really gives it a cool dynamic. And yes, I did realize that I only had 6 of these containers when I started off. I wanted to build this with room to expand, so if I got a couple more containers, they would easily fit in here. But if I ever do end up buying more than 12 of these containers, I can simply make another one of these cabinets and stack it on top. So in that aspect, it's kind of modular, but I'm gonna have to make this look good for the YouTube thumbnail, so let's go ahead and fix that right away. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this video. If you wanna build a cabinet similar to this one, I'll leave a link for the downloadable plans in the description box below. So make sure to go ahead and check those out. Thanks for watching, everybody.